Episode 3 of Frozen Planet is called Spring, and this is all about spring at the Arctic and the Antarctic. So as usual, we start in the Arctic, we see the ice melting, and here you see polar bears. So the first real image you get is a polar bear swimming past the melting ice sheet. The imagery of a polar bear swimming is symbolic of climate change and the melting of the ice caps. We see a family of polar bears. We're led to believe it's the same family from the last episode, the mother and the two cubs. We just see them roaming around the ice looking for food. The mother jumps in the water, the cubs going after them. We also see a male looking for seals, swimming long distances to find them. That's all good. We basically see that the polar bears aren't having any luck finding any seals in this habitat. The last episode's a very fun episode. Everything's kind of having a good time for the most part, or at least things aren't looking desperate yet. This one, we're seeing that things are a little bit more desperate. Well, the summer's great for a lot of things, it isn't for others. And that's what this episode does really well. It does give you a good balance. The polar bears here are not having a great time. We even see them trying to get seals and basically giving up and just hanging around in the ice waiting for the end of summer. The polar bears are always good. The polar bears are a good way of starting an episode. We kind of start most episodes with polar bears, I think, going forward. And as we've explored in previous episodes, we see migrants, we see red phalarope, Arctic terns. The Arctic terns are quite good. Another polar bear sequence where we see the terns pecking the polar bears to deter them from taking their chicks. That's kind of a bit more funny, but it does have serious undertones. You know, you see the polar bears, again, struggling. We see eiders as well. They kind of benefit from the terns' protection. That's a bit more of a transition into more kind of hopeful stuff, where we see animals that are actually having a good time in the summer. We also spend quite a bit of time with snowy owls. The snowy owl sequence is quite good. It's kind of a funny sequence at the start. We see a male going off to get lemmings, and as the chicks get older, lemmings aren't going as far as they used to, so he has to go out and forage a bit more. The best part of that sequence is the snowy owls defending their owlets from skuas. The snowy owls leaping out with their talons outstretched to deter the skuas is really good. I think the best part of the Arctic sequence was actually the Arctic wolves. We saw in the last one that the Arctic wolves weren't doing so great because they're obviously not very well camouflaged in the summer. In this one we see that things are a little bit more critical. They're really struggling to find food. They go in to take musk oxen, which is a sequence that you've seen a lot before. We've seen it since, but I think this sequence was very good at showing you the wolves' perspective, more than I think other sequences did. I know Planet Earth 3 did, but I don't think that was done as well as here. Even when the wolves almost managed to get a musk oxen calf, you're not really on the musk oxen side, but then when the musk oxen come in and drive them off, you kind of feel like it's a blow. Usually that would be seen as a triumph for the musk oxen, but here you just kind of feel bad for the wolves, especially at the end when they've got to go back to their cubs with nothing to show for it, and they're having to travel even further to try and find some food, having to take the cubs with them. It was kind of open-ended as well. It didn't have a hopeful ending. The sequence where they're howling and the cubs are howling back, it's pretty sad. It did a good job of showing you that summer at the poles isn't great for everyone, and this sequence was probably the best example in the episode of that, so I really liked that sequence. And then we go to Antarctica. Again, like the last episode, we start off the Antarctic sequence with South Georgia. Here we see king penguins. We saw a little bit of them last time, but we see a lot more of them here. We see that things actually get quite hot here, and the chicks don't really have a great way of cooling down. They go into little rivers, and they actually just flop in the mud to cool off. The adults are able to go out to sea and actually cool off a lot better in the actual water. That was a good sequence. Again, it was just a good display of king penguins. A lot of great shots, a lot of great imagery. And we also see fur seals. The fur seal sequence is a little bit like the elephant seal sequence. We basically see mothers have given birth to the pups. We got males fighting each other and the pups getting caught in the crossfire. I don't know if I like it more or less than the elephant seal sequence in the last episode, because it is kind of similar, but it does feel a bit more different. We don't get as many of these types of sequences as we do elephant seals. You see the seals fighting, it's pretty bloody. The pups getting separated is quite sad. Thankfully, you do see the pup getting back to its mum, so that's good. But, you know, you do feel like this maybe doesn't happen all the time. A lot of the time, this story probably does have a sad ending. And we see krill. I mean, we can't talk about Antarctica without talking about krill. They are the basis of the whole food chain, generally. And the sequence is really good. We do spend quite a bit of time talking about krill. We also see humpback whales taking krill. That's a great sequence. Again, something we've seen before and since. But it was just really good. It was very well filmed. Something I will say about this episode and this series as a whole, this came out in 2011 and the shots still hold up today. And then we see minke whales. So minke whales are not as impressive as humpback whales. They're the smallest of the baleen whales. However, this sequence is very good and one of the more memorable ones of the series, because we see orcas hunting a minke whale. When BBC Earth post their top wildlife moments on YouTube, this sequence always pops up quite high. That you really do feel for this minke whale just trying to outrun these orcas, but you kind of already know that it's not going to work out. There's so many orcas, and they're actually a similar size to the minke whale, to be honest. The minke whale even tries to beach itself at one point, and when it starts to tire, we see the orcas biting it. You see a massive chunk is bitten out of this minke whale. It's pretty horrible. At that point, you know it's over. Nothing looks good, basically, and as you'd expect, the minke whale is taken out. It's pretty violent. It is still pretty harrowing, and it's one of the more memorable parts of the episode, I'll say. It is a pretty good sequence. And we end the episode with the Daily Penguins. It's nice, we see them with their chicks. What's not so nice is the skuas taking the chicks. That's not very nice. It's actually pretty gruesome watching the skuas actually rip the chick apart. That's not very nice. It's very much hidden. They have done a relatively good job of covering up how horrific that actually is. But you do get little snippets here and there, and yeah, what you see is not very nice. But it kind of ends on a kind of happy note by talking about the parents now are going to focus on their one chick that's left, and it'll probably survive. And the diaries covers two main sequences. The first is the polar bears. They shows you how close they were getting to the polar bears, and actually the stuff, especially with the mother and cubs, was actually pretty scary. Actually, they got pretty close to them. You do kind of feel like they could easily get in the boat and overpower them. That was quite daunting. But the best part of that is actually the people filming the orca hunt. So the orca hunt from the first episode with them washing the seals was great. You really get a sense of how privileged it was to be there to film that behaviour, but also kind of how dark it was. You do get the sense that multiple hunts were spliced together to make that footage. But I think the most kind of, again, sobering part of that sequence was when the orcas kind of turn on them. The orcas definitely try and create a wave to wash them off the boat. Whether they'd have taken them or not, I don't know, but it is one of the only times that it's technically orcas hunting humans in a way has ever been put on screen. I know they really weren't, and they were really just more doing it out of curiosity, but it is quite interesting to look at that, and yeah, that's quite a good sequence. So yeah, this episode is, again, pretty good. It's not as good as the last episode, but it's still really good. It's a good transition away from how fun the last episode is to how bleak the next few will be. You definitely see how animals are struggling, but it's interesting to see the animals that are struggling in this episode will probably be doing better in the next one. It does a good job of taking the same cast of characters and kind of showing you how their lives are different throughout the seasons. Well, that's what I kind of like about this series. It does kind of feel like a continuation of an ongoing story, which is good. So yeah, this episode, the highlights were probably the Arctic wolves and the orca hunt. I think they're the two bits that stand out the most for me. But yeah, this episode as a whole is pretty good. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. So yeah, what were your highlights? Let me know in the comments below. I'll be doing the next one next week, which is the autumn, unsurprisingly. So look forward to that. As ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to. It's perfectly fine. And yeah, I'll see you next week, and goodbye.